All right, today we're going to talk about literary analysis. And as it says here, we are going to engage in a mind trick. Yes, it's just that simple. We need to make sure that when we are trying to deal with literary analysis questions surrounding literature, we just put ourselves in the right mental space to think about literature from a different perspective so that we can be analytical as opposed to thinking about it in the ways that we always have. So we're going to begin by talking about literature in the ways that we always have thought about it. First, I want to quickly remind you to go back, if you haven't yet done so, and watch the video Why We Teach Literature, so that you have some idea about sort of the basic importance of literature, why it keeps showing up in curriculum, why they keep expecting you to read it and understand it. If you haven't done that yet, it's a great idea. Now back to this. Literature is experience is a fantastic thing for us to begin with, because the good news everybody, is that you already do this. You don't have to learn it. No, the bad news is this is not literary analysis. So we are going to be aware of what literature's experience is so that we can keep ourselves separated from that when we decide that we need to write, for example, a literary analysis paper for an English class. So, what do you already do? Well, from the earliest time that we are introduced to literature, from the time that we're sitting on someone's knee and they're reading it to us, we are instructed somehow to empathize with characters. We're told that when Cinderella is sad, we should feel sad. When Harry Potter is scared, we should feel scared. So in this case, we are empathizing with our characters, and we're identifying with them, right? That's what we do. That's why we want to read books about characters who are like us in some way, or who we wish we were like in some way, if we're talking, for example, about superheroes. And so this is the way that we've almost always thought about literature until we get into a school situation in which someone wants us to do something different. And that something different is literary analysis. And literary analysis means looking at literature as a representation. So I'm actually going to take literature's experience and I'm going to move it up here so that we keep it separate, right? Literary analysis is actually looking at literature as a representation. So now they're together there. And we're seeing this literature as a representation of a specific culture, a specific time period, a certain geographical location. So for instance, I might see the Iliad as representative of ancient Greece and its values. Okay, so I'll explain what that looks like. Let's talk for a moment about the idea of a hero in general. If we think about the idea of a hero, for most of us it often looks something like this, particularly in Western civilization, since I was just talking about Achilles. If I think about a specific hero, whether it's an ancient Greek hero or a modern day superhero like Captain America, if we look into those heroes, then what we're actually able to see is what they say about what a culture values, because literature tells us about a culture's values. So we're always going to be looking for these values. Now, how can I do that in a way that it's not dreadfully boring, or I don't lose myself and get drawn back into literature's experience? Well, one of the easiest ways that I've found to help my students with this is to have them just think about themselves as a 12-year-old. I know that sounds odd, but what we're going to do is make ourselves 12-year-olds in that culture, not in this one, right? If we're 12-year-olds inside of that culture, actually we'll do it this way, then what we can do is think through what we are learning. Okay, so if I'm a 12-year-old in ancient Greek culture and I read about Achilles, what am I learning about what it means to be a man? What am I learning about what it means to be a hero? What am I learning about what it means, alternatively, to be a woman in that culture by reading about other characters in that story? This is the crux of literary analysis right here. It really doesn't get much more complicated than that. If I can put myself in the shoes of a 12-year-old in that culture and figure out what values are being passed on to me through the story, or what I'm supposed to be hearing through the story, then I'm well on my way to being able to construct a good literary analysis piece. So now I want to show you another example of a hero very quickly. If you are from an Eastern culture, particularly in this case Indian culture, as in from India, you would recognize this man as Gandhi. Some of you who are not Indian, I'm sure, can also recognize him that way. His physical form, his beliefs in life echo many traditional Indian ideals, going back to the hero Ramayana and others. And they would recognize the values being transmitted through this, and also the other stories that echo these values, as compassion, love. Heroes in many of these stories don't succeed without cooperation, whereas this is a much more individualistic idea of succeeding on one's own. So just some things to think about as far as how we can look at these in even very well-known stories or well-known figures. Very quickly, I want to take a look at the story Cinderella, just to give you some idea of how we can handle this literature in two different ways. So if I look at Cinderella from a literature's experience perspective, this, of course, is the way that you've always done it. We feel bad for Cinderella because she's being mistreated. We're angry at the stepmother and the stepsisters because we know what they're doing is wrong. We're excited and full of suspense while the glass slipper is being tried on various people. That is how we are experiencing the story along with the characters. However, if I take another look at Cinderella now from my more distant literary analysis perspective, then I'm going to stand apart from the characters and I'm going to look at them through the lens of this 12-year-old from within that culture and see what I'm learning. Okay, so what am I learning when I stand apart from them? So, for instance, there are several literary critical approaches that you can use. Please take a look at our other videos on those. I'm going to very quickly walk through some of them here just as examples. So if I decide I'm going to look at the story from the perspective of gender, okay, that would mean when I am a 12-year-old boy or a 12-year-old girl watching this, what am I learning about what it means to be a man? Right? What are the gender roles? What is expected of a woman? What makes someone a particularly virtuous woman, for instance? I can also, within that culture, examine the piece of literature from the perspective of class. Within Cinderella, what does it mean to be upper class or lower class? In this case, clearly we're going to a ball. What she needs is a fancy dress. So these elements of class do play into her success. Part of what she sort of wins at the end of the story is acceptance into a high-class, prosperous life, right? She's married to a prince. So I can pay attention to class and class distinctions in the story and see what people thought about at the time that it was written. I can also look at mythical elements and find out, for instance, what is a hero? In this case, that would be our prince. What about supernatural elements? Why do I need a fairy godmother in order to save me in this story? What does that mean about that culture? We can also, of course, look at historical and cultural documents from the time that the story was originally written and see what kind of light those things would shed on particular elements of the story. The goal of literary analysis is to give us new ways to think about a piece of literature and also to use that literature backwards in a way to find out what new understandings it opens up about history and about that particular culture. So in all of these ways, it can be useful for us to use this mind trick to get ourselves in the correct mental space in order to think more deeply about literature and get those literary analysis points.